Peak babies in the house. Thank you.
Hola, everybody.
Hey, everybody, welcome.
Is Jennifer Makumbi in the house yet? Don't think so. Another person on a very different time zone.
I don't see everybody.
Well, you say
All right. Let me do Nancy's.
We'll wait a few more minutes, another minute or so as people file in.
Larry, I'm going to switch a duty with you. Do you have screen sharing?
Yes.
Okay, can you download the graphic and screen share? I realize I'm going to lose my ability to let participants
to watch.
in.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Let me grab it.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right, well, it's probably time to get started. I'm sure more people will join in. The numbers change a lot as we go, so we'll go ahead and get the show on the road. So thank you for joining us, everybody. This is super exciting to have one of our Meet the Authors events here for everyone to meet 10 brand new authors with books either recently released or coming out within the next few months. I'm Carrie Obrey, the director of Midwest Booksellers, and thank you for coming along on this somewhat wild ride of reinventing our programming during the pandemic to let you still meet wonderful authors as we are introducing today. I'm joined by Larry Law, the director of Great Lakes. He will be sharing the introducing duties with me, and also by Kate Scott, our programs manager, who will be running the tech. I think you probably know the format. Today, 10 authors will introduce their newly released or forthcoming books for you to get acquainted with and sell to your customers. The order will be children's picture book, YA middle grade, and then adult fiction. Each author has 5 minutes to present their book, and I will let them know when they have 30 seconds remaining. As attendees, please use the chat field generously, and you can also feel free to ask questions directly between presentations. As the authors present, we'll put the gallery request form in the chat field, so please go ahead and request the books you're interested in receiving. So before we dive in completely, we have a special book to share, as one of our authors couldn't be with us today. Rania Abouzeid is in Beirut near the site of the catastrophic explosion, and her power and internet are unreliable. We chose her book Sisters of the War, 2 remarkable true stories of survival and hope in Syria, in part for its timely topics. So I'm going to read a bit of Rania's presentation in her place. I recommend you visit her website to see her journalistic work in action. As well, the gallery request form for Sisters of the War also contains Kelly Yang's book, another scholastic author who is taking her place. So in Rania's words, thank you for including Sisters of the War in your event, and I'm so sorry I can't join you. I'm writing this note from Beirut from an apartment in one of the worst hit neighborhoods that bore the brunt of the blast. I do not have windows or doors or electricity, except for a generator that operates a few hours a day. There are cracks and pieces of glass embedded in my concrete walls, but I consider myself lucky. I still have walls and a home, and I am uninjured. Many of the Syrians I met in the years covering the conflict lost everything, including their lives. After the Beirut blast, I received messages of support from beautiful people around the world, whom I have come to know through my work as an international journalist, including from places such as Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and countries that are sadly familiar with adversity and violent upheaval. The families of the girls and sisters of the war also reached out. These families survived things that most of us, if we are lucky, can only imagine. The young girls in my book overcame war, losing their home, displacement, kidnapping, and the violent deaths of loved ones. They, like so many Syrians I know, are fiercely determined to live, not just merely survive, despite their difficult experiences and circumstances. They are a lesson in resilience for all of us, particularly in this difficult year. It's my hope that young people will reach the last page of Sisters of the War and think, if these girls in Syria overcame all of that, I can overcome my problems too. In the same way that Anne Frank helped me as a young reader to understand the horrors of Nazism and its impact on a family, I hope that the girls and Sisters of the War will do the same for young people trying to understand what happened in Syria and what that looked and felt like for regular families. I hope that young readers will be inspired by the courage of Ruha, Allah, Hanin, and Jawa. I know that I am. So thank you, Scholastic, for sharing this wonderful book with us. I'm sure it will be a powerful read. Go ahead and request a galley if you would like, and Larry will take it away for Adam Rex.
Thank you, Carrie. Adam Rex is an author, illustrator, and a bit of a comedian. I suggest you visit his website to read his bio for a good laugh. He's the creator of numerous books for kids. Frankenstein Makes a Sandwich was a New York Times bestseller, and The True Meaning of Smekte was adapted into the DreamWorks film Home. If you don't see his name as a main author byline, you'll recognize his art in the books of many beloved authors, such as John Cheska, Mac Barnett, Neil Gaiman, and Kate DiCamillo. Mac Barnett says Adam Rex is one of the best writers and illustrators making picture books today. And On Account of the Gum just might be his best picture book yet. It's perfect. You should read it. Thank you to Chronicle for sharing On Account of the Gum coming in early October. Please tell us more, Adam.
Well, thank you so much. I kind of imagine I was probably asked to go first so that my silly picture book about a kid getting gum stuck in their hair wouldn't follow a very touching portrayal of a war-torn and tragic part of our world history. So this is wasn't quite the lead-in that was probably best for my weird, silly picture book, but I'm going to do my best anyway. I am an author and an illustrator. For the last week, I've also been the distance learning supervisor for my third graders. So if during this, my 8-year-old runs over to tell me that Microsoft Teams has crashed, that's not part of the presentation, but it might happen anyway. So I just wanted to say sorry about that in advance. So I am so excited to be able to share this book with you. Authors and illustrators finish their books a long time before they're published. So I've had to just sort of sit on my hands and wait for this to come out. And I'm going to introduce it to you now, but it's one of those kinds of books it introduces itself better than anybody could really introduce it. So I'm going to just show you the first handful of pictures. So this is On Account of the Gum, written and illustrated by Adam Rex. That's the gum, right there, that you got in your hair. On account of the gum that you got in your hair, your dad said, sit still, and your sister said, duck, and you sat very still. Still, the scissors got stuck in the gum that you got in your hair. Okay, we went on some websites, and all of them swear if you want to get scissors and gum out of hair, you take 2 sticks of butter and smear them along, and I see. It appears that those websites were wrong. Don't give me that look. That's the first handful of pages. I think you get a little bit of an idea about where it would go from there. It kind of all rolls downhill for this poor kid. So I imagine with a book like this, I'm probably going to get a lot of questions from people. Did this idea come from a childhood memory of you getting gum stuck in your hair, or has your son recently gotten gum stuck in his hair? You never know where ideas are going to come from. I remember that this one was a conversation a couple years ago with my brother. One of my nieces had gotten gum stuck in her hair, and we started talking about all of the typical like home remedies, like sticking peanut butter in there to get the gum out. I started to immediately think, like, what if you put the peanut butter in there and then you had to send something else in after the peanut butter to get the peanut butter out, and then it would escalate. And that's when I got really excited, because I think I've made a pretty modern picture book here, but I also feel like it sort of has shades of The Old Lady Who Swallowed a Fly. It feels like the kind of text that, apart from the word website or whatever, it's something that I could have written 60 years ago if I had been making books then. So I think in a lot of ways it's a very contemporary book, but I'm hoping it's kind of a classic book too. Because, I haven't ever gotten gum stuck in my hair, but this book reminds me of the day in middle school when I decided I would unclog a clogged ketchup dispenser in the cafeteria by pumping it really hard. And it did become unclogged. It became unclogged spectacularly all over me and the three people standing next to me. We looked like extras from a Samuel Peckinpah film. And I just remember that day. And I think that every kid has a day like that. Every kid has a day where they were sort of swept up in a snowballing calamity. And everybody has had an embarrassing day at school. And so that's why I think this book is going to resonate with kids. I really wanted Chronicle to have the marketing say, if you've ever been a kid with your fly down, this is the book for you. And Chronicle said, no, we're not going to do that. So we didn't. But anyway, On Account of the Gum is the book. Ask for it by name, and I really appreciate you listening to me. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Adam. That was fantastic. We will move on next to Kalynn Bayron. Thank you to Bloomsbury for working with us to host Kalynn. She is an author as well as a classically trained vocalist who studied opera and dreams of performing one day. She was born in Kansas and grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, where, as she says, she's pretty sure her dad, Errol, was the first Black man to set foot on a glacier. When she's not writing, you can find her listening to Ella Fitzgerald on loop, attending the theater, watching scary movies, and spending time with her kids. She currently lives in San Antonio, Texas with her family. Her debut novel, Cinderella Is Dead, came out on July 7th from Bloomsbury YA. Kalynn's hope is to provide an opportunity for readers to see themselves reflected in her work and take heart that they too can be the heroes of their own stories. Please tell us more about it all, Kalynn.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'll take a little time to talk about Cinderella Is Dead and why I wrote it and what it means to me. So Cinderella Is Dead is the story of 16-year-old Sophia Grimmins. She's a young woman living in the kingdom of Versailles, which happens to be the place where Cinderella lived and died about 200 years before. Cinderella's story has become the backbone of this society, and young women are expected to model their lives after Cinderella herself. Sophia is preparing to attend her very first annual ball, an event which is now mandatory, and but she's in love with her best friend Aaron, and she's kind of feeling the weight of this very oppressive patriarchal society kind of bearing down on her. She goes up to the castle, and there she makes some choices that alter her destiny and maybe kind of affirm it. She runs away from the ball, and this choice puts her on a collision course with the king of Versailles, but it also puts her on a path to uncovering his deepest, darkest secrets. Cinderella Is Dead kind of started with my own love of fairy tales and fantasy. I loved fairy tales as a kid. Everything from Cinderella to Sleeping Beauty to The Wizard of Oz. That was really kind of the spark for this story. But as it started to take shape, I couldn't really separate the nostalgia I felt for those fairy tales from my own kind of lived experience of not seeing anyone who looked like me in those stories. Princess stories, fairy tales that felt kind of magical and fun and full of adventure really kind of dominated the media I was consuming, but there was just no one who looked like me in any of those stories. So I'm an 80s baby. So I came up in a time when the Disney princesses were kind of at their peak in terms of popularity and visibility. I remember seeing, Little Mermaid for the very first time and being really just completely enthralled with it. But so when I sat down to draft Cinderella, I really wanted to take this thing that I had only ever been allowed to participate in as an outsider, as an observer, and find a way to make it kind of new and accessible to an entire group of readers who have been largely overlooked when it comes to the Western canon of fairy tales. Cinderella is more of a remix than a retelling. It doesn't hit the same familiar beats as the Cinderella story, but instead it kind of expands on the established narrative. I wanted to deconstruct the story's use of patriarchy and heteronormative societal expectations as tools of oppression and control. And so it only made sense that it should be told from the viewpoint of someone who would be most vulnerable under those conditions, but also someone who would be most apt to do something to affect real lasting change. So it had to be Sophia, my main character, this queer Black girl who knows that this story and this way of thinking renders her invisible. And she is not invisible. She is not nameless. She is not voiceless. I know personally the frustration of trying to live and survive in a world that tries really hard to kind of deny your existence and your humanity. My own identity puts me at the intersections of marginalized race, gender, and sexuality, and exposes me to those kind of compounding oppressions that come with each of those constructs. So Cinderella Is Dead is ultimately started and ended as a love letter to my younger self and to the readers that just says, you are already the hero of your own story, even if you don't know it yet. And that's Cinderella Is Dead, and it's out everywhere right now.
Thank you, Kalynn. That was wonderful. Next up, we have Tiffany D Jackson. Tiffany Jackson is the critically acclaimed author of award-winning YA novels, including Allegedly Monday's Not Coming and Let Me Hear a Rhyme. Her forthcoming title, Grown, which we'll hear about today, will be released by Catherine Tegen Books on September 15th. Jackson's books are all laced with stellar reviews, and the ALA called her a titan among her peers. Tiffany is a Brooklynite and studied film and media studies at Howard University and New School, and has over a decade of experience in the television industry. Thank you to HarperCollins and Tiffany Jackson for participating today. Please take it from here, Tiffany.
Hi, everyone. I'm unmuted, right? I'm terrible at these things, so I'll apologize in advance. Thank you so much for having me here. I hope you are all well and safe. Wanted to tell you a little bit about Grown, a little bit about me, if I've never met you before. So I am the author of Allegedly Monday's Not Coming, Let Me Hear a Rhyme, and my newest book, Grown. Grown is about a 17-year-old aspiring singer who is swooned by a legendary yet older R&B superstar with promises of fame, leading her to turn against her family until his body shows up and all fingers point to her. Now she must prove her innocence while bringing her abuse to light. If you've read any of my other novels, you already know that this is loosely inspired by a real case and has a pretty gutting plot twist, and this one is no different. This book really highlights how girls can be groomed and manipulated, which explains how girls can be lured into abusive relationships. It sort of answers a lot of many of the reactions around the R. Kelly case, Weinstein, and the documentary series, especially answering statements that a lot of people made, statements like, oh, those girls knew what they were doing. Doesn't matter if a girl thinks she knows what she's doing. The adult in the room always knows better. He knew better, and we should hold those adults accountable rather than blaming children for what they don't understand or fully have the scope of their actions. This is also a very personal story for me. I've also, kind of put myself on Front Street. My first boyfriend was 22 and I was actually 15 at the time. And I didn't fully understand how inappropriate our relationship was until I was much older, honestly, until someone mentioned the huge age difference. And I knew I wasn't supposed to date him, but I didn't realize how deeply I was involved with him and how wrong it was. It was the biggest secret I ever kept from my family. And in fact, I only told my mother just this past January, right before the cover came out, because, even though I spent a whole year drafting it. And it was an uncomfortable conversation, but it was a conversation that needed to be had. And my parents are fully on board and supportive of all of this as well. But mostly I wrote this book, this novel, I hope it gives kids who might be in the middle of these type of similar predicaments a true bird's eye view of the situation so they can have agency to make better decisions. And I'm putting a spotlight on myself because I think it's important to show kids that, you know, hey, we all made mistakes. We have all kept secrets from our parents in some way. I don't know one kid who has not, you know, held something back from their parents, even the pastor kids. But we all make mistakes, but we are not defined by our mistakes. And we can go on and make more of a life for ourselves. That bump in the road that I had truly propelled me to go off to college, to grad school. I led a ridiculously terrific 15-year career in television that led me to being a full-time author. And this is my 4th book. I have 4 more coming. So I have no regrets and I stand in my truth. Hopefully that kind of explains everything about the book. I have a little special treat. I haven't sent this out yet, but I have a playlist from the book that features all the songs. I just put it in the chat. That features all the songs that are actually in the book. And so there are actually a lot of classics. I kind of kept it like 90s. So she's like singing like Whitney Houston and Patti LaBelle. And of course, my favorite, like Mariah Carey. So this was like my dream book to put like, you know, my own like people in this book because I'm basically, I had no singing capabilities. Like I was basically kicked out of choir. Like they didn't want me there. So, but I put all my hopes and dreams into the main character, Enchanted. And so I really hope you enjoy. It was also, I just found out it's a first Indies pick for fall. It's #1 Indies pick for fall 2020. I didn't even know what that meant. Even though I'm like 4 books in, I'm still discovering things like every day, like I'm a debut. And so I'm definitely a super senior and I had no clue until yesterday that it is #1 the top 10 for fall 2020. So I really hope you enjoy.
Oh, you're still muted, Carrie. Thank you, Tiffany.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations on the Indie Next pick. That's, of course, a big deal in our world. Moving along, born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, Amanda Macrina was homeschooled through high school and studied history and political science at the University of West Georgia with an abiding interest in ancient Rome and the World Wars. For 3 years, she taught high school English and government at an international school in Madrid and is now a bookseller, in Franklin, Tennessee. Her grandmother was Polish, and she's always been interested in the Polish experience during World War II and the Soviet era. All of this surely feeds into the historical fiction she publishes for young readers. Amanda, please tell us more about Traitor, a novel of World War II, forthcoming from FSG in just over a week.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk a little bit about Traitor. My elevator pitch was that it's about a young Soviet sniper who goes on the run after not quite accidentally shooting his unit's political officer. And some read-alike titles would be Ruta Sepetys' books and Elizabeth Weems' codename Verity. You know, even as I was writing it, I wondered if we needed another World War II story. As a bookseller, I know that's a pretty crowded market. But at the same time, I firmly believe there's still a lot of stories to be told about World War II. I think there's still so many neglected corners of this history that are waiting to be explored, maybe voices that have been silenced before this, or stories that haven't had the chance to be told. I think even though it's a pretty well-trodden field, there's still opportunities for new stories. And Traitor is a pretty personal story for me for a couple different reasons. I wrote the original draft back in high school, and it was the first serious piece of fiction I ever wrote. It was just a short story at that point, but the core of the story was there, about a young Soviet conscript kind of grappling with his role and his identity in the middle of a brutal ethnic conflict on the Eastern Front of World War II. And my family does have Polish roots, and I'm really excited to be able to tell a story about the Polish experience, which I think is one of those neglected corners of World War II history. The Eastern Front, Poland included, is still largely uncharted, I think. because for one thing, a lot of that history was lost in sealed Soviet archives after the war, and it's only recently coming back into public knowledge. And a lot of it is really tricky, fraught, controversial history that continues to drive heated debates to this day. So sometimes it feels like you're walking in a minefield trying to tell these stories. One thing that inspired me as I was writing early drafts was that one of my sources, historian Catherine Meridale, pointed out that thousands of ethnic Poles from inside the Soviet Union and then from Poland itself after the Soviet Union invaded in 1939, thousands of Poles ended up as conscripts in the Soviet army. And that really surprised me and got me thinking about what these conscripts must have felt like, what they must have thought and experienced as part of the Soviet army, how conflicted a lot of them must have been about their role and their allegiance. And that's one of the identity crises I really wanted to explore through my main character, Tolya. The other big identity crisis is that this is really a story about Polish-Ukrainian conflict. And Tolya himself is half Polish and half Ukrainian. So he's sort of a microcosm of the central conflict in the book. Traitor's a thriller, but I think of it first and foremost as a character-driven story. And those questions of identity and loyalty and belonging are so important throughout the story. And my hope is that Traitor resonates with readers asking those same questions today. And I'm really excited to work with independent bookstores to get Traitor into readers' hands. And I just want to say thank you for all that you do, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Amanda. That was great.
Before we move on, you should tell us what bookstore you work at.
I work at Bound Booksellers in Franklin, Tennessee.
Awesome. Thank you.
Next up, we have Cole Nagamatsu. Cole Nagamatsu is a writer of fiction, and her short stories have been featured in a wide array of acclaimed publications. She is the editor-in-chief of Psychopomp magazine, a journal of genre-bending prose, and she works as a visiting assistant professor of creative writing at St. Olaf College. Cole lives in Minnesota with her partner and their cat, Kalahira. Her first novel, We Were Restless Things, is forthcoming from Sourcebooks Fire this October. Please introduce us to your novel, Cole.
Thank you. So it looks like this. We Were Restless Things. It's a contemporary fantasy novel where the fantasy elements are a little quieter and become more pronounced gradually throughout the novel. It is told from multiple POVs. And I just got a little flash that my internet connection is unstable for some reason. So hopefully this holds steady, but just letting you know. The main protagonist is Noemi, and months before the start of the book, a friend and schoolmate of hers named Link was found drowned in this wooded area behind her house. And it's considered a very mysterious death because there's no body of water in the woods or particularly nearby. So people wonder how he got there, but she happens to know that there is this lake that appears and disappears very mysteriously. And she also happens to be receiving text messages from his ghost, claiming that that is where he drowned. So she's pretty certain that that is the cause of his death. But what exactly happened and why isn't quite as clear. The other points of view are Jonas, who's a kid who's new to town and outside the drama, the central drama of the story, but also Amberlynn, who is the sister of Link, who has recently died. So she's very invested in a much more personal way in the drama of the story. And it alternates between their points of view. There's also a couple chapters narrated by the ghost of Link. And hopefully the lighting allows me to show you, but there are also a few chapters that recreate these dream journals that the protagonist, Nomi, keeps. And we have some visual representations, and the glare might kind of, oh, no. So hopefully you can kind of see that. kind of recreated in the book. The main character is asexual. It's something that she's not necessarily comfortable with throughout much of the book, and something that she's still kind of exploring and coming to understand. So it's not something that she divulges to any of the other characters until quite a ways into it, but I think it does figure pretty importantly into how she interacts with other characters. In particular, one of the things that the book explores is the way that she is seen as an object of desire by some of the boys in her life, and how to navigate that from her really specific experience of being ace but not being entirely disinterested in romance, and how to incorporate that part of her identity into relationships, and how she makes herself understood to other people. So that's a big feature as well. And that's something that I think asexual rep is becoming more common in stories nowadays, but certainly when I grew up, it was unfortunately not something that I saw a lot of. So it was important to me to kind of, it's something authors say a lot, but to kind of write a story that, you know, your inner child or the child you used to be really needed to read. So that's part of why that figures in. In terms of the magical elements, I was somewhat inspired by Germanic and Scandinavian fairy tales about water spirits, freshwater spirits that would, this is a spoiler, I guess, because you might be able to draw some conclusions, but that had kind of siren-like abilities, and how a character like that would exist in contemporary America. So while it's not a retelling of a, yeah. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Am I done?
No, about 30 seconds. Keep going.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, anyway, it's not a specific fairy tale retelling, but it does kind of have elements of a fairy tale in it. So it's coming out specifically on October 6th. So that's pretty much everything, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Cole. That was beautiful. We look forward to reading it. Next up, we have John Rocco, who is a New York Times bestselling Caldecott Award-winning author of a wide array. Oops, I just made my thing way too big to read. Coming right back, hold on. Let's start over. John Rocco is a New York Times bestselling Caldecott Award-winning author of a wide array of books for children, such as Wolf Wolf, Moon Powder, Blizzard, and Blackout. His art graces the pages of many top-selling books, such as Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series. He's an art director in the entertainment industry, working with companies such as DreamWorks and Walt Disney. I highly recommend you visit his website, where you will see all of these talents come together and the charming videos he's made demonstrating how we got to the moon. John, please tell us more about your book, which will be published by Random House Children's Books this October.
Thank you. Thank you, Heartland Booksellers. This is an amazing opportunity. I'm so thrilled to be sharing this book with you. So between 1968 and 1972, we sent men in giant rocket ships to the moon, and 12 of them actually walked on it. And the thing is, it took 400,000 people to actually get them there. And this book explains how we did it. I've always been intrigued by the engineering behind the Apollo missions. I started out studying engineering myself. My father's a scientist. And what I discovered and love about engineers is that they're problem solvers. And I wanted to create a book that celebrated that, celebrated problem solving. It's just the sheer ingenuity of what they did to get someone to land on the moon and bring them back alive. Just blew my mind. So I set out to create this book that explains the science and the technology and everything that went into doing that. And in that process, I also discovered the humanity behind it. And I should explain how that happened was, as I did all my research in many books and online and everywhere else, there were a lot of things that I didn't quite understand. And I knew if I couldn't understand them, I wouldn't be able to explain them to anyone else. So I reached out to an Apollo engineer who had worked on the life support systems for the Apollo spacecraft. And he brought me to his house, showed me all these Apollo artifacts, and I got hooked. And before I started the second draft of my book, I had about 24 Apollo engineers, like on speed dial, to answer any of the questions I had. They explained things to me. They sent me blueprints and diagrams, and it really made a fantastic experience. And I was able to put their stories into this book. So if you could imagine, like David Macaulay's The Way Things Work, but also introducing all of the stories of the people that were behind this. And what I'd like to do is share with you some of the interiors from the book. It's 264 pages. Every page is illustrated. And I will share that with you now. Okay, so let me see. So I start off with the history of the space program, but then I also get into the science and the physics behind spaceflight and explain that, as well as the mathematics and everything the engineers had to do to figure out how to get to the moon and back. Then what happens is we go into the actual building and construction of these giant rocket ships and the spacecraft itself, and all the details within that. It also goes through all the different systems of life support, including the spacesuits and in the spacecraft. But then we learn the stories about the people who were actually behind creating these systems. There are many overviews of all the NASA facilities where all this stuff took place. And it's all written in real time so that you get the experience of being there back in the early 1960s as they're building these facilities, like the vehicle assembly building, where they actually constructed all the rockets once all the parts were sent to Florida, and the mission control rooms. And then the final part of the book is actually a real-time journey alongside Neil, Buzz, and Michael Collins on their Apollo 11 mission, starting off with the launch that early morning in July, and through their landing and eventually splashing down back into the South Pacific. So let's see. I'm going to stop share, and I'm going to say that's the tour. And I really hope that you enjoy this book and sharing it with your buyers, because I think it really encapsulates the entire Apollo space program in a fun way that's accessible to all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. That was fascinating. Next up, we have Kelly Yang.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Yang. I'm the author of Front Desk and Parachutes, my YA, and I'm here to talk about Three Keys, which is the sequel to Front Desk. And I have, I was really blown away by the love for Front Desk and how it just sort of resonated with so many kids who never really saw themselves represented in a book, never saw themselves on the cover of a book before, and have traveled to so many different schools and taken a lot of time to internalize all of that feeling and love. And then I went back and I decided I was going to write a sequel to Front Desk that was truly going to be worthy of all the fans. And it took me a while. It took me many drafts. It took me a lot of false starts and, you know, a lot of manuscripts really, to finally come up with something that I really believe is just captures the heart and spirit of the first book and pushes us even more into the immigrant experience. And so the book picks up with Mia Tang. She is a 11-year-old first-generation immigrant. She is running the front desk of the motel that her parents, along with this wonderful community of people, have bought from the previous owner, Mr. Yao. And she's running the front desk with her best friend, Lupe. She's never had a best friend before because she's never stayed in the same place long enough to make a best friend before. So she thinks she's gonna have the best year ever. But it's an election year, and it's a very heated election year. There's a governor's race in California between Pete Wilson and Kathleen Brown. This is a real governor's race in 1994, and there's a new law on the ballot, which is called Proposition 187. And if it passes, it will kick out all of the undocumented children, undocumented immigrant children from our schools and make it illegal for them to access healthcare, make it illegal for them to go to the hospital. And this is a real law, and it really happened in California. So in the lead up to this election, something that I lived through, you know, there were just an incredibly devastating amount of hate crime, of, you know, ads, a lot of these ads blasted on TV, you know, and it was just one of the most heartbreaking things to go through as an immigrant kid. And even though my parents and I had papers at the time, you know, in my mind, I always remembered as a kid waking up at the crack of dawn, going with my mom to renew our visa down at the Immigration and Naturalization Services building. And it was this big old building, and you'd have to get up at the crack of dawn and wait in this line, you know, and all these people were waiting, and you wait for your turn to go before this big, powerful man who was going to decide your fate and was going to tell you, yes, you get to keep living in this country, or no, you don't. And my heart would just like pound. The closer we got to the front, it would just like boom, boom, boom. It was just, I was such a wreck. And we'd have to do this every year. And my mom would always tell me, you know, try to look cute. And I was like, what does that mean? She's like, try to look like a nice, cute girl, the kind of person they want. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean, right? And so it was just growing up with all this. I always knew that the difference between having papers and not having papers was so small. It was just a matter of when you got there, did this guy wake up on the right side of bed or not? You know, did you look cute enough? Did you smile enough? Did you smile not too wide? Like all these things in my mind. So I don't really see any difference between me and any of these people who are going to be affected by this law, because this law was going to target all of us. It was going to lump all immigrants together and make it okay to hate us, basically. And so with all these acts of hate crime, you know, it's going to take all of Mia's bravery, resilience, and voice to stand up for it. And when her best friend Lupe reveals that she's actually undocumented, Mia learns to be an ally. And the girls have to work together to change voters' minds and to save Lupe's dad, Jose, who gets picked up by the police. And, you know, growing up, these ads and these racist slurs and acts and hate crime, it was so much tattooed in my mind that I just knew I had to write about it one day. I thought it was in the past. I thought that maybe something like this would never happen again. But as we see, you know, with our current situation in our country, with all the racism and the election that's coming up, how critically important it is to give kids the tools to fight back and to stand up to racism, to stand up for what's right, which is what Front Desk and Three Keys is all about. It's a really timely book. It comes from history, and it sort of helps us understand where we're at now and what got us there, but also gives us all the resources to do something about it, to change the path that we're on. You know, we don't have to take this. We can learn to be an ally. We can bond together. We can be united in love and get us through our current crisis. And at its core, really, it is a warm and funny book about friendship. You know, Mia's never had a best friend before. She's waited her whole life to have a best friend. You know, there's also a really interesting friendship with Jason, who was her sworn enemy in book 1, you know, because she worked for Jason's dad, Mr. Yao, who was very unkind to her. And so it's going to take a lot of empathy for her to explore that friendship. And she's got to learn the 3 keys to friendship. And finally, it's about the American dream. You know, who gets to have it? What does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to be Chinese? And can you be both? This was something that I struggled with growing up. I always thought if I was too much of one, I couldn't be the other. And it was really hard. You know, it was really, really hard to figure that out, to navigate it, and to be proud of all your identities, to be proud of who you are, and that you don't have to change, to compromise, to fit a particular mold. It's a fast-paced book. It's a page turner. It's very, very suspenseful. There's high stakes, and you get a sense that a lot is on the line for these kids. A lot is on the line for this country, and that's very much the way it is today. I think it's a book that lives up to the first book. Again, I've traveled the nation. I've seen the impact of Front Desk, and I'm so proud to give these kids a book for them to love and hug forever in the form of 3 keys. Thank you guys so much.
That was fabulous, Kelly. I learned from your bio that you grew up alongside your parents working in 3 different motels. So the experience is direct to yours, but I wasn't expecting so much wonderful progressive political content. So awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are now moving into adult fiction, and we have Pete Beatty, who is a writer, editor, and a Cleveland area native. He has taught writing at Kent State University and the University of Alabama, and has worked in the publishing industry at Chicago Press, Bloomsbury, Open Road Media, and Belt Publishing in Ohio. He currently works at the University of Alabama Press as an acquisitions editor and a rights manager. He lives with his wife in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Cuyahoga is his first novel, published by Scribner in early October. In a starred review, Kirkus calls Cuyahoga an improbable, downright preposterous yarn, ably spun, and a great entertainment for a time in need of laughter. So please take it away, Pete.
Hey y'all, thank you for the introduction. It's great to be here with you, and thanks for taking a few minutes to listen to me blab about my book. So it's coming out on October 6th from Scribner. On October 6th of this very strange year that we're living in. Don't worry if the pronunciation of Cuyahoga or Cuyahoga or however you want to say it slips around. All you really need to remember is that it's the river that divides Cleveland, Ohio into its east and west side. It's probably most famous in the sort of American public imagination for catching on fire in 1969 and about 13 times before that also. But my version of Cuyahoga actually concerns the events of 1837, and it is based lightly on about the way a Law and Order episode is on real events that happened. This guy here on the cover is Big Son, who is the resident spirit of the times of Ohio City, which is Cleveland's rival city on the other side of the Cuyahoga. And he does things you would associate with a Davy Crockett or a Paul Bunyan. He chops down more trees than you can possibly imagine. He wrestles Lake Erie. He tames wild animals. He's really just a symmetrically featured, handsome white dude who's smashing stuff and putting it back the way he thinks it ought to be. Sort of classic old superhero. He has a problem, though, which is that his job, his superhero, his feats, they don't pay any money. He doesn't have money to start a life. What he thinks is going to make him an honest man, a real boy, as Pinocchio would say, is the love and affection of Miss Chloe. Now, there's a couple problems with this plan of getting a job to get money to marry Miss Chloe. The first one is that she does not want to marry him. Big Son is not doing a good job of hearing that. The second one is everybody's broke. It's the Panic of 1837. The third one is that he has a rival for her affections. He's actually got a couple rivals for her affection. One of them is a new rich guy in town named Tom Todd, and the other one is his own brother, Big Son's little brother, Medium Son, who is actually the narrator of Cuyahoga. And this novel really kind of rides on his voice. It's goofy, it's poetic, it's a little bit lyrical, but it's entertaining. If you've read True Grit by Charles Portis, that was one of my lodestars when I was writing this book, to kind of get that an authentic feeling 19th century vernacular dialogue and dialect. And the plan that everybody comes up with to save Big Son from himself, to save this hero from being bankrupt, is to take his feats and put them into a book, into an almanac, into Big Son's almanac. And they're going to sell that book and give Big Son the money. And the person who gets tasked with writing the almanac is none other than Medium Son, or Mead, our narrator. And while this is happening, things sort of tumble down the stairs plot-wise. There's a fight between the two sides of the river over where to put a bridge that leads to domestic terrorism. There's some unruly pigs that cause some trouble. There's a lot of pratfalls and nakedness and sort of spit takes and that kind of slapstick humor. But there's also really kind of a more serious side of the book where it is talking about toxic masculinity, domestic terrorism, and what a miracle is worth to us, what we ask for from our heroes, and what it costs on both sides of the equation. And there are also a lot of jokes. I hope you guys will give it a chance to check it out. I had a lot of fun writing it. It took me long enough, so you're not going to get another book from me for like 5 years. So enjoy this one. And to sort of give you a soundtrack to the book, I have created a playlist. It is an indie exclusive playlist, so it's mostly indie rock of music that I listened to while growing up in Cleveland, while writing this book, with a few surprises in there. And of course, the leadoff track is Cuyahoga by R.E.M., a song about the Cuyahoga River catching on fire. So you guys enjoy the playlist, and thanks so much to all of you guys, all you folks in the indie community, for really being the kind of the heartbeat of the literary community. I would not have been able to write this book without the community and inspiration I've taken from the spaces that you all create. And I cannot wait to get back all up in your business when there's not a pandemic going on. But in the meantime, I'll be out here online, and thanks so much.
Hey, thank you, Pete. That was awesome. Can't wait to read it. Next up, we have Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi. Jennifer Macumbi's first novel, Kintu, was the recipient of numerous prizes and awards abroad, and her story, Let's Tell the Story Properly, was the global winner of the 2014 Commonwealth Short Story Prize. Jennifer lives in Manchester, UK with her husband and son, and is a lecturer in creative writing at Manchester Metropolitan University. The novel she's here to talk about today, A Girl is a Body of Water, a LitHub most anticipated book of 2020, is a starred review. Kirkus calls it a magnificent blend of Ugandan folklore and more modern notions of feminism, and says the book is a jewel. The New York Times says Makumbi writes with the assurance of wry omniscience of an easygoing deity. Published by Tin House Books and distributed by Norton, A Girl is a Body of Water will be released on September 1st. Please share more about your novel, Jennifer.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. A Girl is a Body of Water is about Chirabo, a 12-year-old girl growing up in Uganda in the 1970s with her doting grandparents. And despite all the love that Chirabo is enjoying, she has two problems. She doesn't know who her mother is. And when she asks family, they say, oh, we don't know where she is. And she doesn't believe them. But then recently, she has started flying out of her body, and she said that means she's a witch, and probably that's why her mother is not around.
Jennifer, we can hear you, but you're a little bit quiet. Maybe you could lean closer to your computer.
Is that better?
Better, thank you.
Okay, so Chirabo has two major problems. She doesn't know who her mother is, and when she asks family, they say they don't know where she is and they don't know who she is, which of course she doesn't believe. And also, she has started flying out of her body, And she suspects that this is perhaps because she's a witch, and she suspects that maybe her mother is unavailable. She rejected her because she's a witch. So she decided to consult the village witch, who, when she goes to her, says, "Oh, I'll be able to help you with." But instead, she grooms her to become a feminist rebel, to bring down the patriarchy, and to live a life of independence. So afterwards, we watch as Chirabo starts to interpret what the witch told her, and she makes a mess of it. But sometimes she gets it right, which is quite wonderful to see. Now, writing this novel, I had quite a few things that I wanted to look at. One of them was African childhood, and that arose out of me coming to the West and seeing all the images of African children that are posted on Western media. You know, they are skinny, they are flying infested, they are dying. And that's not the kind of childhood I've seen around me or mine, and it doesn't reflect at all where I come from. And I thought, I need to talk to the world about this childhood, because sometimes people look at you and think, oh, the girl, poor girl, she made it and she looks so healthy right now. No, we really have good childhoods in Africa. So I wanted to put that out. But perhaps more important, I wanted to talk about African traditional feminist thought. So what happened in the 70s, Western feminism arrived in Africa, and it arrived with such muscle and with such knowledge, and it had places. This is American feminism, this is French feminism, and it was written, and it had theorists behind it, and it totally obliterated the feminist thought that were developing organically within African communities. So I thought, you know what? We need to go back and find the feminist thoughts of our grandparents, of our great grandmothers, and bring it up and discuss it, because at the moment in Uganda, feminism is rejected because apparently this is not from our culture. So I thought, first of all, I would need to talk to Africans and say, okay, look back in the past. You will find our organic feminist thought, but also to show that it's not so different from Western feminism. And so we can have a conversation with that. The second thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of feminism was women as subjects of oppression. Now, throughout the feminist movement, we've been talking about um, the patriarchy and how it oppresses women, and we've been talking about men and how they oppress women. But we've taken the gaze away from ourselves as subjects of oppression. How do we behave? How do we relate to each other under oppression? And I thought that we could look at that, and I show how when women cannot fight back against the patriarchy, they tend to turn onto themselves, or they tend to turn on each other in order to release all that pent up emotion that accrues as a result of oppression. Another aspect that I wanted to talk about is myth and myth making. You know, life is about creating myths around ourselves. And as women, there are so many myths that have been created around us. And I was surprised when I arrived in the West and I found out that, at least here in Britain, it was believed that when women have children, they start to lose their brain cells. Every child you have, you lose brain cells. So God help my mother who had 11 children. Perhaps she would be an idiot by now, you know. But those are myths created around women. Apparently, women on their period, they cannot be trusted. You wouldn't trust them with a flying a plane, you know, because you don't know what's going on with them. And the other one, which is really laughable, is women can't park cars. So I thought, you know what, we can't do away with myth or myth making. But actually, if we get rid of these myths that have been created around us, we can create our own myth. those that are in line with our vision of who we are and what we are, and that work with our agenda. The other myth, sorry.
Jennifer, you got about 30 seconds left.
The final theme that I wanted to talk about was feminism and class, but that speaks for itself. But in Uganda, when women acquire a certain level of independence, or they go out and work, other women come and take their space within the maternal or the domestic space. But those women who take on those spaces tend to look at the women who employ them as men. And this has made it very difficult for us to have a conversation across classes in terms of feminism. And I hope you will enjoy my book. It comes out at the beginning of September. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I know Tin House is very excited about your book, and we're excited about it as well. We are now moving on to Ruth Ware, an author whose books you probably know and love. Her books are full of murder, family secrets, toxic friendships, and things that go bump in the night, in contrast to her own peaceful life. From a very early age, she loved writing and would pound out stories on her mother's typewriter to handwrite and share them in 3-ring binders. She worked lots of jobs, from waitressing to bookselling, and then she headed to the publishing world, which made her wonder if there was room in the world for her novels. She committed herself to finding an agent, and the rest is history. She is the #1 New York Times and Globe and Mail bestselling author of In a Dark, Dark Wood, The Woman in Cam and 10, The Lying Game, The Death of Mrs. Westaway, and The Turn of the Key. One by One will be released in September by Gallery Scout Press and imprint of Simon Schuster. One by One is a September indie next pick. Kirkus says, Ware does what she does best, gives us a familiar locked door mystery setup and lets the tension and suspicion marinate until they reach fevered pitch. Another win for Ware, simply masterful. Let's hear more about One by One, Ruth Ware.
Hi, well, thank you so much for having me. And what a lineup to follow. I think my Christmas wish list just went up about 3 times. The first thing I wanted to say is that having briefly worked as a bookseller early on in my career, I know what a privilege it is to be asked to recommend books that could stay with people for years in some cases. But I also know how incredibly hard booksellers work, what a physical job it is, what a lot of work goes into just every aspect of putting together an event. So mainly, I just wanted to say thank you. I have huge admiration for anyone who works as a bookseller, particularly in the current climate. And I'm so grateful for you as a reader and also as a writer. But thank you for letting me tell you a little bit about One by One, my thriller, which is coming in September. It's a locked room thriller set in the French Alps, in a luxurious chalet in an exclusive resort. And for the first time, I have 2 narrators, both outsiders in different ways. So the first narrator is Erin. She's the chalet host at the chalet, together with her colleague Danny. And she's an outsider because she's in a sort of slightly weird position where she's both subordinate to the guests, but also kind of in charge of telling them what to do. The other narrator is Liz, who is the former PA to Snoop, the company that's taken over the chalet for the week for their corporate retreat. Snoop is an app company, and I had the fun of kind of creating this imaginary music app which allows you to kind of snoop on other people's listening and spy on celebrities. In this imaginary app, they've received this kind of huge £1 billion buyout offer, which has the potential to make some of them millionaires and leave others of them out in the cold. The group is completely split. Half of them want to accept the buyout offer, half of them want to retain control of the company and take it forward from there. And so this is why they've come to the chalet to thresh out their options and try to come to a decision. Liz, the former secretary of the company in its very early days, has ended up with this tiny 2% shareholding, which has the power to decide which way the buyout goes. She's the casting vote in effect. And so she's under huge pressure from the two founders to vote with them. On the first day skiing, one of the founders goes missing in a whiteout on a black run. At first they think it's an accident, but when they get back to the chalet, there's an avalanche and the deaths continue to pile up, at which point it becomes apparent that there is a killer in their midst, picking them off one by one, hence the name. It was huge fun to write. Having done friendships, romantic love, family, I guess I wanted to look at the other big kind of influence in our lives, which is usually our colleagues. You know, in some cases we spend more time with these people than we do with our own families. And it can be a hugely warm, supportive relationship, which is very much the case with Erin and her co-worker Danny, who's the chef at the chalet. Or it can be an incredibly toxic one, which is unfortunately the case for much of Snoop. And I was really interested to look at the way that often these startups have a great idea and the founders are lucky enough to have the resources and the connections to exploit that idea. But that doesn't always give them the skills to be great employers, or great at the kind of the HR side of things. And that's definitely what's happened at Snoop. They've allowed some really kind of unhealthy practices and relationships to build up, and it's become this super toxic atmosphere, which of course starts to boil as soon as the avalanche sets in. It was kind of weird. Going into this book, obviously I started writing it over a year ago. I had no idea that I would be releasing a locked room mystery hard on the heels of us all experiencing our very own version of lockdown. When I was writing it, I had no idea about any of this, but I was editing it right at the beginning of the whole lockdown situation. And it was a really strange and surreal experience. I think one of the reasons why I love writing locked room mysteries and reading them is because it really forces you to lean on the resources that you give yourself at the beginning of the novel. You only have the characters and the setting and the material that you give yourself at the beginning. And it forces you to dig really deep, get to know these people a little bit better, to really test their resources and to be a little bit more creative. I think lockdown has been a pretty seismic experience for most of us, pretty horrific for many people in terms of their finances, their mental health. But I think maybe it has forced us all to connect a little bit more deeply with the people in our lives and to find resources that maybe we didn't know we had. One thing that I know for sure I have come out of lockdown with even more appreciation for is the power of stories and the power of books to allow ourselves to connect with other people, to understand our situation, and, you know, to escape our daily existence for just a few minutes. So thank you, booksellers, for everything that you do in getting books out there, because bookstores are our conduit to this. I had huge fun escaping into my imaginary chalet world while I was editing the book. So I hope that readers will get a little bit of that escapism too and have as much fun as I did. But most of all, thank you so much for letting me come here and tell you about my book. And yeah, you're wonderful people.
Oh, Carrie, you're still muted.
Yeah, I just looked up. I was saying it's a pleasure to meet you, Ruth. Your name has been around for a while. It's nice to meet you, and a pleasure to meet everyone else as well. Please share the love by clicking on over to the galley links and requesting those books. Remember that galleys are an implicit marketing request, and publishers share them because they want you to share the love, to go online and tag the authors and tag the publisher and share your words and thoughts. Authors, feel free to grab a few galleys that really inspire you. And also show your love by heading over to our exhibit gallery on our website. It's the publishers who exhibit there that make all these programs possible. They've put together a few of their offerings and best-selling books for this summer and fall, and click around and see what there is to discover for your bookstore. So thank you, everyone. If you would like to save the chat, you can do so by clicking on the 3 dots at the bottom of the chat field. And we hope to see you again next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.